All right, today we're diving into the story of a man you've probably never heard of, but you absolutely should have. We're going back to the 16th century to meet a political genius, a crisis manager, and a defender of his people who mastered the art of survival in a world that was basically designed for him to fail. His name was Jussel von Rosheim.
And this quote from the historian who really brought Jussel's story back to life, well, it just says it all, doesn't it? His entire life was a David versus Goliath fight. It was an almost hopeless struggle that he chose to take on, not with a sword or an army, but with laws, with petitions, and with just relentless, unbelievable courage.
So, to really understand the man, you have to picture the world he was born into. The Holy Roman Empire in the early 1500s. It wasn't a country like we think of one today. It was this chaotic patchwork of tiny kingdoms, cities, and territories, each with its own ruler, its own laws, and its own dangers, especially if you were Jewish.
And look, this wasn't some abstract political issue for Jossel. This was deeply, deeply personal. The reality of his world was brutal. Just a few years before he was even born, 3 of his own relatives were arrested, tortured until they gave a false confession, and then publicly burned at the stake. He was literally born into a world of exile, a world where that could just happen to your family. So, in the middle of this never-ending crisis, a new kind of leader was needed. Not a rabbi to lead prayers or interpret scripture, but a champion who could navigate the treacherous political landscape. This is where Joseph found his calling, stepping into a role that was part diplomat, part lawyer, and pretty much the only line of defense his people had. That role had a name, the Stadlan, and it wasn't just a nickname, it was a formal position. The word means intercessor, someone who pleads on behalf of others. You can think of the Stadlan as the community's official spokesperson, their one-man lobbying firm sent to argue their case before dukes, bishops, and yeah, even the emperor himself.
And the job description? Wow. It was just insane. On the one hand, he had to be an internal peacemaker, making sure everyone presented a united front. But on the other hand, he was their external everything, their lawyer defending them from crazy accusations, their diplomat negotiating tax rates, and their lobbyist fighting for the basic right to travel and do business. It was a constant, high-wire act.
So, the big question is, where did his power come from? Who gave him this job? It wasn't a king or an emperor, and the answer to this question is what made him so incredibly unique.
And this is the key. Unlike a so-called court Jew who might be appointed by a ruler to manage finances, Jossel was a true grassroots leader. Around 1510, he was chosen by his own people. His authority came from the communities he served. It flowed up from the ground, not down from a throne. But that confidence in his role, in the mandate he had from his people, well, it once landed him in some very hot water. In a petition to the court in 1535, he signed his name with this title, which basically translates to ruler of the general jury in the empire. To the emperor's prosecutor, this sounded like treason. And this blew up into a whole legal battle. The prosecutor accused him of arrogance, of treason, yelling that only the emperor could be a ruler. But Jossel, cool as ever, just stood his ground. He explained that Reiserer was simply the best German translation he could find for his Hebrew title, Parnus Umanhig, which just meant leader and provider. He actually won the case, but it just goes to show you what a razor's edge he was walking every single day. Now, winning lawsuits over your job title is one thing, but Jossel was a strategist. He knew that just running around, putting out local fires wasn't going to work long term. For real, lasting protection, he had to go straight to the most powerful man in Europe, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. And he was unbelievably successful at it. For more than 20 years, Jossel was a constant fixture at the imperial diets, these huge political gatherings of the empire. He was always there, always making his case. And look at the results. In 1530, he got a sweeping order confirming all Jewish rights. In 1544, a landmark decree that specifically defended Jews against the horrific blood libel accusation. By 1548, he'd even secured a personal letter of protection for himself and his family. And here's the really brilliant part. These weren't just symbolic pieces of paper. Jossel made sure these imperial decrees had actual teeth. The 1530 privilege, for example, slapped a massive fine of 50 gold marks on anyone who violated it. By doing this, he cleverly made an attack on a Jewish person an offense against the emperor's treasury. It was a genius move. But Jossel's fights weren't just in the courts. He also had to step into the ideological arena to confront one of the most transformative and controversial figures of his day, a man whose words could inspire millions, Martin Luther.
Now, Jossel believed in the power of dialogue. He actually traveled to Saxony, hoping to meet with Luther in person, to reason with him, to plead for a fairer, more humane stance from the great reformer. But Luther, whose early writings had been more moderate, flat out refused to even see him.
And the reason why soon became terrifyingly clear. In 1543, Luther published one of history's most notorious anti-Semitic texts, On the Jews and Their Lies, where he called for burning down synagogues and destroying Jewish homes. Josel's response? He didn't answer hate with more hate. He wrote to the city leaders in Strasbourg, appealing to a higher authority, law, reason, and morality, arguing that mercy is not forbidden by God anywhere.
So after a whole lifetime spent in this unequal, almost hopeless struggle, what did it all amount to? What was Josel's lasting legacy?
Well, his legacy wasn't just one victory. It was a sophisticated three-part strategy for survival that he practiced for over 40 years. First, you advocate externally. You go to the very top and get legal rights locked in. Second, you regulate internally. You organize your own community to minimize conflict. And third, you mount an ideological defense. You fight back against propaganda with powerful, reasoned arguments.
He was so much more than a firefighter. He created a blueprint. He proved that even a community with no official power, scattered and marginalized, could navigate the corridors of power. He showed them how to use unity, strategy, and a courageous voice to survive against all odds.
And that really leaves us with this final thought. Josel's story is such a powerful reminder that history isn't just made by emperors and popes. It's also made by the tireless advocates, the people in the margins who refuse to be silent, who dedicate their lives to speaking truth to power. His story shows us the incredible, lasting impact that one dedicated voice can truly have.